Hey guys, well, here we are. Howdy, is that you? Huh?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Say something.
Hello.
Okay. Is that you? Say something.
Yo, it's me.
All right. Cool. What's up, guys? What'd y'all think?
What's up? It was a good debate.
It was a lot. It was like 5 hours or something.
Chris, is that you? Yeah, it's Chris. Hey, Chris.
Hey.
I know you got a sermon to preach tomorrow, so, you know.
No, on Sunday. Today is Saturday. It's now Saturday, man.
I just realized. Wow.
Listen,
Yeah,
I talked a lot. I
confused.
want to hear Howdy and Dit for a bit. I'll give my assessment in a minute. I know you like to give. I know you like to give it to debaters first, but I'm curious in these guys. So
okay, great.
It's because he's tired. He's been talking for 5 hours and he's
It was
exhausted.
a long debate, man.
that was.
It's a long debate.
I guess I'll say, like, I was with you. I was like agreeing with a lot of what he said. I was like, man, if this guy was like a dispensationalist, we'd probably like agree about everything almost. That's the impression. But it's like, okay, but let's not talk about what we agree about, because that doesn't seem pertinent. Like, we should talk about what we disagree about. He's very like he talks a lot. He's a bit of a yapper, and I think he has like a good cadence, and he's easy to listen to and all that, but he does seem to go on for a bit, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I like Steve. He's a chill guy. Like, as far as interlocutors go, he's chill. One thing I noticed, especially the John 12 point you brought up, was super strong. I don't see, like, I don't even remember his explanation exactly. I don't know if you can recall it. But it's like, I don't understand. What distinction was he making between verse 42 and 44 and 46, where it literally tells you the whole succinct argument made in that passage, whether John said it or whether Jesus said it, the whole point is the words are consistent. Like, these people believed, but they didn't confess him. But he's making the point that if you believe, you should not abide in darkness. How do you even read that when you understand the word believe in different ways? How does that even make any sense?
You're sort of making the argument that me and Charles had a stream yesterday, and I was talking about, well, what if I say that there's different, because you had mentioned valence and about like positive and negative connotations. And I was like, well, what if, we say that really there's more than one kind or type, or, there's distinguishing traits like adjectives, and there's like positive and negative adjectives. And maybe you could make an argument such that you can implicitly refer to like you could say like positive connotation faith. Like it doesn't need to be explicit, you know. And it's more of like a theological thing, but
no. So I think it's in principle possible to argue that, and I want to emphasize in principle. I know you don't like in principle arguments. How do you suggest you did once before? It is possible in principle to make an argument that there could be different kinds of faith based on different valences. The problem is going to be if you have to have a way when you approach it to justify that range exists, and then you have to have a way, in my assessment anyway, to say that in this particular case this is the reading. And the problem is I don't see how you can do that without a pre-existing theology informing that. And I don't know how you get away. Now, again, we can do the whole Bayesian structure, and given the priors, what's the expected? That's all a perfectly legitimate move to make. But my point is just, if you're going to use your theology to say these people can't be true believers because my theology breaks, okay, well then where's the theological claim to justify that initial framework? I want to see that frame, and that's what I'm never, ever, ever seeing anywhere. So I'm not saying it's impossible in principle. I've just not seen anybody do the work to make it reasonable.
Oh, this is you're absolutely correct, but this is actually something I missed that I should have asked in the question. Was notice in John 12:39, it says, therefore they could not believe. Then it says, nevertheless they believed in him. That's like,
oh wow,
incapable. That's
I didn't even see that. Wow.
I should have asked that. I knew I had that argument. I just forgot it.
Wow.
Tunde, welcome. What is your belief?
Hey, Layman. I actually know you. I was on one of the. This is actually Io, but
okay.
I was.
Everybody changes their names all the time, so I have no idea.
It's half of my full name. So
okay.
I lean Free Grace. I've spoken with Chris before. We've interacted on his Substack as well. Good to see you, Chris.
Okay.
I don't know how you're still awake.
Good to see you, man.
I don't know how you're still awake.
Just adrenaline.
Yeah, but it was a great debate. I had actually been listening last night.
Thanks for the blessing, Dale. Go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. I had actually been listening last night to your debate with Matt S. About a couple weeks ago. And so then I see this one today, and you know, it just was really fitting. But yeah, I think it was overall a great debate. Dietmar, I love a lot of your content, man. I think you were actually technically the first Free Grace guy who I was introduced to, I think just through the algorithm. And then that kind of led me to like guys like Chris and stuff. But great to see you here as well. I loved your question about John 12. I think that, yeah, when you asked that question, he really kind of just, and I don't say this disrespectfully, but he almost kind of like short-circuited and just kind of like reverted back to just begging the question. And I really don't think it did. I don't think his answer did your question any sort of justice. Yeah, maybe I'll jump in with more as it comes to me, but yeah, that was one of the most poignant moments of the debate to me.
I had something I was perturbed that because I was reading a lot about verbal aspect. I was reading quite a lot about verbal aspect coming into this because I thought that he would make the verbal aspect argument, and he did. I was like, oh, here we go, and then it sort of just evaporated. He didn't really push back on anything you were saying about that, and I was like, darn. I was waiting for him to like. I mean, at the very least, I was like interested how he viewed like the landscape, because there's so much disagreement on it, you know.
Right.
Like even on the verbal aspect, his point was that it's in the present moment. So despite it not being continuous, he never responded to your John the Baptist point, because John the Baptist is John the Baptist right now, but he's still not baptizing in this present moment, is he?
Right, exactly. And here's the thing. I mean, I say verbal aspect stuff very confidently, but anybody who's read the literature, and I've just got my toes in it, like there's like 3 or 4 different views on verbal aspects. Wallace, for example, tries to hold the older view in light of the new verbal aspect theory. So there are some who hold there's no time, some hold there is time. Those debates exist, but my point keeps being over and over again. I genuinely was surprised he didn't know Greek. I came into this having watched his earlier debates, the way he throws these terms around. I just thought he knew Greek, and for him just to, I'm trying not to be a jerk. It's after showing his public, but he just folded on that. He's like, yeah, I just don't know. I'm like, why would you not only make the argument, but repeatedly make the argument when you don't actually know the language and don't know the syntax. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah,
There's
there's
humility.
Yeah,
There's humility in it, right? But it's like you raise a good point. Like, why would he even make that in the first place if he concedes he doesn't know Greek?
but there wasn't humility when he debated Wilkin and kept making that argument over and over again.
Yeah,
It-
it was
it's
actually.
like-
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, it's just like whenever I debated Lucas Curcio. I watched his debate with a Reformed person, and he was throwing Greek around, and then I go into the debate thinking he knows Greek, and he's like, I don't know Greek. It's like, why are y'all doing that? Y'all need to have disqualifiers. Like if you use AI, you put a disqualifier, you need to have a disqualifier to what degree you've attained Greek. I'm fine with saying I have a Greek understanding enough to complete a THM program, and that's all I claim.
Right.
Now, I've been studying informally for years, but that's the minimum that I claim, you know? But go ahead, Tunde.
Yeah, no problem. I was just going to say it's ironic because as someone who's more recently been introduced to this whole free grace debate and things like that, I learned about the present participle argument from conditionalists originally from Steve. So yeah, I mean, to hear that and then find out he didn't even know the language was kind of shocking to me. And this kind of came out as well in your debate with Matt S as well, Chris, you know, because there was one part I just couldn't even believe what I was hearing when you were speaking in John about the woman at the well, and he tried using the same argument there. I mean, it just broke down, and he said how it didn't matter if the Greek wasn't on his side because the context still shows he's correct, and even a 12-year-old could see that. He said that himself. And I'm thinking to myself, dude, I remember reading that scripture when I was like 12, 13, and you can clearly see that what makes Jesus's water different is the fact that you don't have to go back for it multiple times, and that's what even the woman at the well knew. So it seems like everyone in the text, in the story, as well as you yourself, Chris, except for, in this case, Matt S., seemed to know what the implications were.
Right.
I mean, I think even Steve, this is actually an interesting point on John 4. I think he understood what the implications were, and he even agreed. I was like shocked when he's like, oh, I agree it's one drink in this passage because of the aorist, which by the way, that shows he doesn't understand what the aorist means itself anyway, but It was inconsistent with his earlier argument. But when he said that, I was like, how can you agree with it and then still walk it back and form this convoluted theology that it's like, oh, this well in you, and then you have to keep drinking, and then someone who drinks once will continue drinking, but you believe that someone who believes can stop believing. Like, it just makes no sense. Like, it's just so convoluted, bro.
Yeah, and you think like, okay, it has to mean something. He has to do something with those verses. So, you know, what could he really tie it to other than, I guess, just some sort of like initial justification? But now we start sounding like Catholic, you know, terminology, because they argue for the same thing, that there's like an initial justification. So maybe that's what the initial drinking is. But once again, it just defeats the whole purpose if you just have to keep going back.
I had a moment debating with him, and I'm not going to name anybody. Y'all maybe know who I'm talking about. Where I had one particular debate with one individual last year, and this particular individual spent the entire time saying that's not what that word means, and it was we never got him pinned down in the entire debate what the central word was, and this was of the actual debate proposition, the debate resolution, and he kept changing. It was that's not what. And there was I feel like Steve was doing that in some regard with salvation, because like he signed up knowing it was a debate on once saved, always saved, and then he spends half the time talking about salvation in this larger sense. Well, no one thinks that once saved, always saved refers to every broad aspect of salvation. And then as soon as he would get uncomfortable, Dittmar, he would just go to one of those larger aspects rather than deal with the actual core we were supposed to be there discussing.
Exactly.
So, but look at this, Dit. What do you got to say about this? When's your debate with Jack Hissaw on water baptism?
I don't think we ever sketched. I don't even know who that is.
Okay, I don't know who he is.
Maybe I'll bring that up to Donnie because I don't have any debates coming up.
Yeah. Let's see. So, what's A.K. Richardson going to do? A.K. Richardson highly looks up to Stephen Gregg. You know, A.K. Richardson uses the same arguments. Now, I saw where Steve Gregg tried to shift things more dispensationally, you know, where he was trying to go with the covenant and promise and stuff in the very beginning of your debate, because that's where he thinks his strength is, you know. but yeah, I think what we saw here was Steve Gregg was recognizing I'm a scholar in this particular area, and I know what I mean by scholar. He has stuff written and published, in Logos, and I don't know exactly what particular area that is. I think it relates more to eschatology, but we know this. I mean, everybody should know this by now. Just because you're a scholar in one area doesn't mean you're a scholar in another area. I didn't like that. I mean, I still don't like it. Let me put it this way. If someone is a scholar in one area and they don't have an opinion, I have a problem with, because I've gone to ETS and I'm like asking questions and they'll defer me to different people. And it's like, I want to know your opinion. You're a professor. I want to know your opinion. And they didn't want to give it. And I think that's wrong. Qualifying is saying this is not my area of field, but this is how I understand. The reason I say that is because every Christian should be developing their understanding of the Bible, regardless of how deep they are, and just saying, this is my initial observation. These are my initial thoughts on this. I'm willing to stick my neck out of here. You might cook me in this area, but here's what I believe. Put something on the table, and it was good that he said, I'm not a scholar, because this is what I think's going on, Chris and everybody. You know how Jesus' disciples and John's disciples were fighting with each other? Now, I know this is not a perfect parallel, but sometimes the disciples of the teacher are more dogmatic than the actual teachers themselves.
Yep.
And they put these teachers, senseis, on pedestals. But I mean, John already said who Jesus was. But leaving the analogy, the point is that we're going to have to go through these people that have been put up on a pedestal and to deal with their stuff, and then maybe it will have a trickle-down effect, because I think a lot of people have put their trust in their sensei instead of the biblical arguments and developing the ability to evaluate these things. That's why the Eastern Orthodox right now are not standing up to debate. I don't know if you know this, Chris. There's some Eastern Orthodox that were reached out to that have not followed through on certain debates, either responding to the emails and yet they're debating all the time, or not follow through on their commitments, given schedules and all of those things like that. Yet we have a true Orthodox person that was willing to debate, and all people say in the comments, I'm being dishonest because he's not an Orthodox. Look, I don't care what kind of crip you are. I don't care about your sect and what hood you're from. The point is, y'all are both Orthodox and you both teach a process of salvation. And so, but they're trying to cope. They feel like, oh, this dude lost and he don't represent Orthodoxy. And it's like, okay, well, how many of these people do we got to debate before we get to the top tier ones, before it trickles down and people realize y'all have just been following the emperor who's not wearing clothes?
Well, can I ask something? Because I've read some of Steve's books on preterism, partial preterism, but I don't know if he has any writing on soteriology.
I've not read anything he wrote, so I don't know. The only thing I watched was his Wilkin debate.
Okay.
Not sure how you got dropped, Tunde.
Do you know, layman's, whether he's ever written on soteriology?
I don't know. All I know is that the Emperor. Have you read Empire of the Sun?
No.
That's what A.K. Richardson uses as his main book. And I think he conflates the kingdom with salvation and then takes all the promises conditionally. Because, I mean, if Israel don't have a future, then you don't have a future.
It looks like he has some writings on salvation.
I know he does a lot of work on Romans 11. And I've heard him talk about that. So,
one thing.
I would definitely read his books before I debate him.
You read all of them?
I'm gonna read the pertinent one. I mean, that's what I did with what was his name? Dr. Sam. Was it Harris? No, what was his name? I can't remember. The partial preterist. And there's a couple others. I read Genesis book. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, Chris, you remember my question that you elaborated on 1 Thessalonians 5?
Mm-hmm.
His point, I explicitly said in my question that it's a different Greek word from the one in chapter 4. And his response was, I agree, which he can't agree with what I said. I was like, dude, that doesn't make sense. That you literally cannot agree. It's the total antithesis of the position.
You
And then he's
notice how Eastgate always runs out of money when he comes over here? I don't understand it, man. I guess he likes his name in the lights or something.
That's funny. Yeah, but I was like,
you ask solid. You ask solid. You always ask solid questions. You're.
I mean, it's not even about my question. I don't care about that. I was just
No, I
curious.
understand, but I'm just saying that you put good arguments concisely in question format, and he was just. It's like, well, I just agree. Well, you can't, man. It violates your whole point.
The whole point you made was that whether you're living this lifestyle of faithfulness or not, you'll be saved. And his whole point was that you have to overcome and live this lifestyle in order to be like, you can't say one and the other and both be correct. But I was going to ask, what do you think about that passage in general, like 1 Thessalonians? The only place I've ever seen that written on was in Constable's notes.
You are the only person who I've ever heard use it. And every time you use it, I think to myself, that should make it into the standard arguments. And I keep overlooking it. I think it's a phenomenal argument. I need to look a little more about the best way to deploy it, but I think it's strong. I think it shows that if you take slumber, I don't know if you can apply it to apostasy yet. It's obviously about immorality. But I think there's a stronger connection, and I was trying to get the end of the debate between immorality and apostasy. Oh, well, I'm still believing even though I'm immoral, or I don't think I'm as immoral as everybody else. I haven't formulated that just right yet.
If you're talking about the sleep argument, that's in Dillo, and Eli used it in his debate. I don't remember if it was a 2v2 or that, but yeah, it's in there. Ashley's got a question for you.
Steve thinks that all the promises are conditional, right? Even the sonship, right? He even said Abraham had to leave family or
I gotta feed my cat. 1 second.
Sure. Somebody gonna say something?
I was gonna say on the conditional point, this is where you have to be super precise with your words, and you were.
Yeah.
Like people in the comments are like, "Oh, Chris said it's not conditional at all. That's where he lost me." I'm like, dude, he said it's not conditional in the sense of God's faithfulness
Right.
to that initial. Like, there's obviously an initial condition, but
Right.
after that, God's the one that does the faithfulness. It's not.
And I didn't realize until halfway through the debate that he had misunderstood that very point. So you're exactly right. Yes, there's a condition for receiving the promise, but once the promise has been granted, there's no condition on God fulfilling the promise. So my own comments on Steve thinking that where he's interpreting the fulfillment of those promises conditional, the problem, I obviously think it's the problem. But then there's this quasi-Calvinist thing he's doing, right? Maybe y'all can help me work through this. There's this well, if you're a true believer, you're going to do these things. How does that not reduce down to just works? And then we have this issue of all true believers do these other works. Well, you have the Venn diagram overlapping thing. There are some believers who don't do, like, say, baptism. Well, that means only those believers who are also baptized. That's the extra conditions. Well, then it's just not true that all believers, unless you just define all believers. So Calvinists have a way. Calvinists can say the reason all true believers do these things is because of election. I don't know that Steve has the theological resources to say all true believers. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how he doesn't end up at a works-based salvation in practice. I just don't. He can't say all believers have everlasting life. So he has to say there are only all true believers, and all true believers are those who also do these good works. That's hard for me to square.
Wait, on the same point, it's actually made me think. And it's on the point of Verse Sean as well, where he said the believers overcome. Isn't that a paradox? Like, how can he believe that the true believers that have this like real substantive belief will do these things? But then there's also people who truly believe who don't do those things and fall away. That's literally impossible. Because if you're a true believer, you will do these things. So how could it be such that you stopped doing those things to make yourself not a believer anymore? How is that even possible? Like,
Anybody want to comment on what Ashley's saying here?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Was
Yeah,
going
we hear
crazy,
you.
and for sure, I had to switch to my laptop. I was going to say too that in this debate, as well as in past debates I've watched with you, Chris, I've noticed on multiple occasions people trying to appeal to certain verses in Genesis, like Genesis 18:19. There's another one that I can't recall right now, to try to show that the covenant wasn't unconditional, and I think that you guys did a good job at responding, and I think that it is important to lay out, and this is kind of addressing what Ashley's talking about here, that there are two planes on which the covenant can operate, right? Like there's the, as Chris said, once it's given, there's no other condition for God's faithfulness to carry it out. But there's the kind of temporal sense in which, for example, like I always point people to the golden calf incident, right? Like God was ready to wipe out all of the Israelites, and he would have done it. And it's interesting because the Mosaic covenant was already inaugurated by that point in Exodus, because it had been inaugurated back in Exodus 24 before the golden calf incident. And yet when God is about to wipe out the people, two things happen. One, he says, I'm going to wipe them out, but I'm still going to make them a great nation, showing that he's still bearing this other promise in mind and not just collapsing the Abrahamic into the Mosaic as if they aren't these distinct things. And then two, Moses himself actually appeals to the Abrahamic for grounds to not have them wiped out, which is interesting because Moses is literally the usher, I guess the arbiter, I guess you could say, of the Mosaic covenant. Mm-hmm. The people already broke it. God was justified in wiping them out if he would have decided to do that. And yet Moses is appealing to something that goes beyond what he's even working with God in that moment on. And so I just think that's huge regarding its implications for not just how we should see the Abrahamic covenant, but how even the patriarchs did. So, yeah.
I think the fact that Moses, if you take the traditional authorship as I do, and I think Steve probably does and should, if Moses wrote Genesis, he wrote Genesis because he's prepping us, or if you don't care about if the redactic, whoever the redactor is, right? They put Genesis in there as a prelude to the Mosaic covenant. And the reason the Mosaic covenant is, the idea is, and this is just in the theology of the Torah itself, the law comes after. You don't need Paul for this. The law comes after faith. God is not interested, even in the Torah, of people obeying the law apart from faith. He wants them to believe, and he calls his people, and then he gives them a covenant to regulate their lives. And so to make that covenant up here, which is about social regulation, as Charles always talked about sociological, to make that covenant regulation constitutive of whether or not you've done the earlier thing of to believe, is just to be backwards. And then to finish Ashley's point here, and then you don't even meet the conditions of that. Abraham didn't leave his family. And then my argument is, I don't think Steve meets his own conditions of covenant faithfulness. No conditionalist does. You have to be honest with yourself. And I worry there's an honesty issue here.
When you say they don't meet the conditions, is it just because you're saying we're all imperfect, or because of something specific? Yeah.
No,
and this was something I said too, because it's not only the sins we aren't supposed to do, right? The Bible says if we have things we know we should do, but we don't do them, those are sin. So, class, raise your hand. How many of you have something in your life you probably should be doing, but you've been neglecting? And I mean, 99% of us would be like, yeah, I could probably be better in this area or whatever. Yeah, so all of a sudden,
somebody says, well, I don't have a lifestyle of sin. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Well, it's not unrepentant. Yes, it is.
That's so. Did y'all answer Ashley's thing?
Yes, we did.
Okay. All right. All right. Y'all keep talking. What was this about? Free grace, basically. Can't
Chris, if I just may ask. Oh, I guess we can let the comment go up. No problem.
No, go ahead. Ask. I just put this comment up. We can do it in a minute.
It got brought up during the debate, and it might have been addressed, but I was doing other stuff simultaneously, so I apologize if I missed it. But in James 2, they appeal to the fact that the demons believe. It's the same Greek word, pistuos. Okay, my instinctual response to that has always been, they're just believing that God is one. Like it's more of like an ontological belief about his existence. Mm-hmm. But even if we were to say it's something more, I know you have that article on your Substack regarding the breakdown of James and the interlocutor, right, and like the quote. That article is so confusing, man, because of the back and forth with the who's saying what and all that stuff. So I don't know if maybe you had anything to say on that, just because I know you'd be able to articulate it better.
Yeah, so I'll keep it brief here, but no. So I don't think demons are making an ontological claim as such, although I appreciate that reading. They're quoting the Shema. And I think that's something, as soon as we say that, well, yeah, and I'm going to encourage you and everybody else, don't rush that. Like, let that sit. He's quoting the Shema. You believe God is one. That statement is something like you have all of the Orthodox theology correct. You actually believe that. Like, you actually trust that that's true. They have all the orthodox theology, everything that follows from it. They believe all that, and they shudder. So how is it that you are going to show your faith if you don't do anything with it? That's the only point that he's making. You can have all the orthodox theology, but having the orthodox theology, having the right body of beliefs, that's the way I take faith there. Having the right body of beliefs in which you are trusting is going to do nothing for you or for your brother. And then at the end, it says you have to add works to your faith to animate your faith. Calvinists and will want to say you have to add that if you have true faith, it'll produce good works. But it's the opposite. It's take good works, add it to your faith so that this body of beliefs that you have is meaningful. That's what demons haven't done. So that's all that he's getting at.
Because their works are the antithesis of what the Christian life would look like.
Correct. Right.
And the demons are not concerned with helping the poor man or providing needs for the destitute or whatever. That's a good point.
Can I add to this? Because I think Chris brought up a really good point, which is that the faith itself is being added to. So it's not like this faith is something that has intrinsically in it the works. It's like you need to add to the faith, which is a dead faith on its own, and get the works on top of it. So the whole point of this, actually, what this proves in James 2, is dead faith, even on its own, is still the real, good faith. It's not good in the sense that it lacks works, but it's still the good faith you need to grant eternal life. Right? That's the whole point of James. He's talking to believers and saying that the faith without the works is what needs the works added on top of it to be profitable, right? Not some random, non-existent, non-eternal life granting faith. He's not talking about some random faith that is non-eternal life granting. He's talking about the real substantive faith, right?
Put TLS by your questions if you wanted answered. Did y'all answer Dingo's question?
No, because I asked mine, remember, and then we went off on, but go ahead.
What would some of you guys say to someone who uses John 28:29 to try to prove that belief is a work? Oh, I'm sure Charles can, or anybody can do this really quick. That's rhetorical usage. It's just rhetorical. This is the work that you must do, believe. This is something that we need to get better at, and I mentioned this in the debate. There are rhetorical people spend so much time worrying about Greek. They would do much better if they would get good at rhetoric. So it's a rhetorical usage. That's all that it is. You can't draw an ontological philosophical point out of rhetoric.
Yeah, I always, and again, I'm not trying to appeal to anecdote as if this settles it, but growing up, whenever reading that passage, I always interpret it as what you said, right? It's a rhetoric tool he's using to show how they're asking for those who don't have the passage pulled up. These people are asking Christ, what are the works that we must do to work the works of God? And he says, the work is that you believe, right? It's supposed to sound contradictory because he's arguing against the idea that it is works. That's right. Just, that was the way I had always interpreted it. But yeah, I saw a comment pulled up that said Romans 4:5. That was my go-to verse.
By the way, I think people miss this fact when they try to cite that as a proof that faith is a work, which is that that whole proof text literally proves faith alone, right? The whole point is Jesus is saying it's that one thing, the one thing you must do. For you to say that one thing then encompasses 1,000 other commandments, that's what faith is. Faithfulness is the total antithesis of Jesus' point. It's literally the opposite of what he's saying. So it's that proof text is self-refuting when you use it.
Go ahead, Layman. I'm sorry.
And StreamYard, you can clip this or clip that, however you want to say it. It's true. We need Trent Horn to step up and debate a free gracer. Right now, he's just going after Neat God and other people like that. You should be wanting to go after the strongest strain of something if you really consider us a virus. Take out this virus.
Did you watch that debate, Chris or Ditmar? Or anyone?
No, I haven't yet.
I saw it, and I think Ryan does a lot of good work in many ways, but I do think his adherence to certain Calvinist doctrines creates easy weak links in his positions that can just be so frustrating to watch, because I'm like, dude, you're using some of these passages so well, and I love that. And oh my gosh, it would just be so much better for you if you didn't, use them badly to affirm some of these Calvinist doctrines. And so I think Trent took advantage of that for sure.
Well, you know what I think about Calvinism in terms of perseverance? I don't know if you guys agree. I think it's basically they believe in a loss of salvation, but it's like a hypothetical loss of salvation. So they don't actually believe once saved, always saved. They believe you can lose your salvation, but no true believer would do the thing that would make you lose your. That's literally all they believe.
That's correct. I 1,000% agree.
Doki, thank you for the membership. All right. Well, You know, that's how you know that this was such a blowout debate. Y'all have nothing to say. You know, you're bored. It's like it was. I didn't get to hear it. I put it on 2-chon speed and I was listening to it at different times. Chris, I appreciate that you put new arguments on the table. You know, stuff I've never even heard before in the exact way. And some of it kind of sounds similar to what Howdy's been saying too. And so I look forward to processing that.
I will just say in general, and I was expecting a more. His opening statement felt to me like a quasi rebuttal. So he basically had 25 minutes, and in 25 minutes, he only briefly touched on my first argument, which was my favorite, and then he touched on it only to accept it. He's like, "Yeah, I can't give you a verse that shows somebody's going to go to hell, and that's just okay." It's like, you just conceded everything, man. Like all 5 of my arguments, you just conceded them all. It's like, oh my gosh.
Well, sometimes when you phrase it in a certain way, people don't understand like the problems with some of the answers that they give.
Right.
And I don't know how to like make it clear, because every time like you run, you sort of like there's like a hidden. I viewed your argument as Bayesian, and I was like, okay. And then when people interact with that, they think that, well, it's not guaranteed because, and then they give some story about how their theory can accommodate the data.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, that's not the point. The point is your theory expects this data that isn't there, therefore there's evidence against your hypothesis, and we lower our credence.
Yes.
Then,
yes, Howdy. Yes.
And it's like, what's your response to that? Okay, sure, I accept that. He's like, well, I don't know. The way I say it is like, okay, if what you're saying is true, we would expect, okay, because this is the argument everyone, or I remember Charles had this debate. He's like, well, if they don't go to the lake of fire, then why do anything? Some, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, there's like, I think there's if we take like implications from the Gospels and stuff as well, man, if I include the Old Testament too, there's something like hundreds of arguments about why you should do good. And the lake of fire is mentioned 3 times in all of Scripture within like 2 paragraphs of each other. And so they managed to make arguments without.
I mean, I like.
Go ahead, Did.
Real quick. Sorry. I like the point Chris made in a previous debate, which was that you just do right because it's right. Like you obey your parents because it's just right. There doesn't really need to be like that deep of a foundational justification.
Yeah, you could make it an analytic truth, like the good just is. You might say what one ought to do, all things considered, and then you're asking something like, why should I do what I should do? Yeah. And it's like, well, in asking that question, you don't understand the terms, like you're just like confused conceptually or something. I think there's better things you can say, but yeah.
I mean, everyone has different like motivations. Like for Steve, rewards might not be like that big of a motivation. So like he can just be content with the fact that it's right because it's right. You don't need a deeper justification. There could be like there's definitely reasoning why obeying your parents is right, but you don't need to get like hyper analytical about that. You just trust that God said it's right, then it's right.
Yeah, substantively, like just really briefly on the openings is like he made a couple arguments, and then he accepted those, and then he sort of floundered around, and then at the end he threw in his present participle argument, and then you pressed him and he dropped it immediately. So I was thinking, like, if we're like tallying the scores, it's like, well, you didn't, you accepted his arguments and then you let him refute yours. And I don't know what are we doing after that,
You'll see this book right here, Motivation, Theories and Practices. It's one of my undergrad books. It's a whole class on motivations. It's all like equations and stuff. It's crazy how many motivations are actually involved, in what we do and why we do and all that, and the theories behind it.
Yeah, and I think there's too much weight put on, because not all conditionalists will say this, but many of them will say that the whole point of, one of the main points of affirming this doctrine is that it's supposed to spark up repentance and put the fear of God into people. But it's like, if the issue is if someone was a believer and now for some reason they're no longer convinced of it, threatening them with eternal judgment isn't going to make someone believe something that they thought was false. All that's going to do is make them a hypocrite, because now they're going to be paying lip service to an idea as fire insurance and not actually coming to a place of genuine belief and trust. So,
Well,
go ahead.
go ahead.
No,
No, I was just gonna say that the Orthodox father that I debated, he basically said that all the motivations I mentioned were not good enough to keep a person from smoking crack. So I guess he thinks the person needs to get smoked in hell in order for them to stop smoking crack. Seriously, I think I made an argument at the end of my closing. I said something like, "That's a crackhead argument" or something. I can't remember.
By the way,
Look what
distantly
Glass
related.
Tuxedo said. Go ahead, Chris.
I'm going to look at Glass's thing in a second. Charles, that last answer towards the end, there was an answer he gave where he was basically trying to argue that, yeah, I'm good, man. I've lived this way my whole life. You've got to clip that out and make like a 5-minute response to that, because that maybe I'm wrong, but that to me is like, seriously, this is the standard. Like, Steve actually thinks he can live that way, and he's not. Okay, but this is the standard. If you can't say what Steve is saying, and I don't think anybody can honestly say what Steve is saying. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but I just thought that was like, wow. Pastor freaks me out.
It was kind of a weird debate because there were times where Steve was very honest, you know, in his responses. It's like, as soon as he opened up the door about there's different types of salvation. Oh, and hardly any of the Bible's about hell. If I say that, I'm going to get massacred. But he said that, and it's like, you just showed the chart. The issue is, does one moment of belief guarantee a glorified body? You know, and he doesn't believe in the lake of fire, right? And he believes in some kind of universal reconciliation, or he's open to it, or possible too. So, but yeah, it's going to be one I definitely study. Y'all continue.
Yeah. Well, I thought the point that you made, Chris, on John 4:13, I think, where it's like whoever drinks, present tense or present participle, will thirst again. But by his logic, if you're currently drinking, that's what the present indicates there, then you don't thirst in the moment you're drinking actively, right? That makes no sense.
Yeah.
That was actually a clever point. I don't think he actually responded to that.
Right. I didn't think so.
Dimar, when are you going to be making videos again, man? I actually really, because see, the problem is Chris is one of the best when it comes to this topic, but he's doing it in these long formats, right? And I feel like you cover that other side where you got these shorts that you were doing. I was sending them to a lot of people, and I had friends who found out about you just completely on their own. And I found it very useful, man. I don't know if you're planning to do that soon. I know you've been busy, but it's very, very helpful.
You must deny your Luke Maxing and come back to making free grace content. Yeah.
I mean, they're not mutually exclusive, but no, I agree. I think YouTube is like, and for Chris, even like YouTube is one of the best places to evangelize. Like, I don't even do that much in-person evangelism. You can reach I've had so many people tell me like how much my videos have helped, which is great.
Yeah.
If God permits, I will get back to it after I finish my dissertation, but I have got to get that thing finished.
Yeah. Awesome.
I was thinking about if someone goes to the Greek, this isn't because it's sort of rude, but if someone's sort of like, I don't know, is puffed up about it and they make like a really bad exegetical argument, like I was thinking about asking them I was thinking about donating and making a question, but I thought it'd probably be too rude. Like I was like, how do you determine when the action chart is ingressive? What are like the lexical indicators for that? What are the semantic aspects that accept that? And it was like, sometimes what you can do is when you have someone, this happens because I always think of this as sort of like relevant in like cross-examination in law, where if someone is an expert, you're at liberty to what's called voir dire their expertise. So, okay, you're allegedly, let's say, an expositor of the New Testament authors, right? And you seemingly have some background in like the languages or something. You say something, and then you say, okay, well, and then you just ask them like general questions about it, and you can sort of like make them look kind of foolish. But I don't know, because it's also kind of rude to do that. But I think some people sort of like put like a giant target on their head, saying "shoot me, shoot me." And I was like, I mean,
yep.
I guess it would just be like really mean to.
I had one debate and only one where I did that on purpose. You might even remember the Tucker debate. and he made such a big deal out of being an expert. And so I just said, all right, in cross, I'm just going to spend like 10 minutes, boom, 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 just showing he didn't. And my standard for doing that, and I've only had to do it once, is if someone puts forward themselves an expert in the subject and they clearly know what they're talking about, then you have to attack their credibility. Because otherwise, how is the audience supposed to know not to trust them? If they claim I'm an expert, put up or shut up.
Right. And
Steve, thankfully, Steve said, I'm not an expert, so I dropped it. But if Steve had kept pressing, we would
that's why, because he dropped it. Yeah.
You know how Jesus, when he saw Nathanael, he was like an Israelite in whom there's no guile. Mm-hmm. Well, here's an Orthodox that has some balls. Here's the Orthodox person I debated. Look, he's responding. I can't say the other ones have balls to use that language, but yeah. So what's left? I mean, what direction do we go to now, in these debates? Do we just keep saying the same thing over and again? I mean, I'm glad you put things in a new way, Chris, but it's just like, do I just run with your opening every time now? I mean, slightly modified?
My opinion, and I'm truly curious. I want to hear every single person on this. I think that's a good question, and I'm really genuinely. I want to hear Dit. I want to hear Howdy. I want to hear AO. I want to hear what y'all say. Here's what I think. I think that because salvation is such a broad issue and it can touch on so many areas of life, I think the thing to do is to all of us have interests in places where God is working on us, and so you should just explore those areas that you are particularly fascinated by and ask, how does the gospel impact that? So, like, for example, how did I talk about this? I am very interested in Bayesian thought processes, and I can get really philosophical. I'm a critical realist. I'm a fallibilist, and so for me, epistemology is a terribly important subject. And I think that the way the gospel is presented, epistemologically, the free grace has got the blessed explanatory power. Now, that goes over the head of most people. But I'm sure that Dit and Howdy and AO and you all have different, like, you're like, for example, the sociology thing. So I think the way that you take it is by saying, okay, so what's the area I'm interested in? And how do I pitch the gospel through this area of expertise? That's my opinion.
I think that's actually really well said because, you mentioned your area of strong interest. And for me, as of late, I've really found myself diving deep into the biblical covenants, Abrahamic, Mosaic, Noahic, everything else in between, and seeing how our understanding of those covenants guides the entire narrative of Scripture. And when I've looked at, in the Old Testament, for example, just God's dealings with the nation of Israel, I mentioned earlier the example with the golden calf, right? And how he was going to wipe them out and yet still was bent on keeping this remnant so that the promise could be intact. Or, and this is something I thought about too, when it comes to Noah and his family being preserved, right? We have to ask ourselves, okay, the world was sinful and God could have just wiped them all out, but why exactly did he preserve Noah? And I don't know if this is an obvious answer and it just didn't come to me till recently, or if I'm way off base, but I thought about the promise in Genesis 3 about the woman and her descendant, right, Eve, and how her descendant, her seed would crush the serpent's head, right? So if he were to just completely start over, well, then it wouldn't be a genetic descendant of Eve who the Messiah is ultimately coming through. So I don't know if that's reading too much into it as to why he decided to preserve Noah and his family or whoever. But when I look at all these different things in the biblical covenants, I see this constancy, I guess, if that's a word, or this sort of enduring nature that God seems to have with these people, even though they do face temporal discipline, right? The exile, the diseases, the wanderings in the wilderness, everything else in between. And yet that covenant still made its way throughout that entire narrative. And I just, again, I like exegesis, so I want to be careful, right? But for those of us who have been convinced by the exegesis, then looking at these different things in the Old Testament, I do find it is very powerful as an illustration of what we've already come to see through free grace. Don't know if that makes any sense or if that lands with anyone, but yeah.
Yeah, I have a slightly different view of covenants, but I think you're on the right track. But Protect and serve. You say there's no such thing as once saved, always saved, based on 2 Chronicles 15:2. If you're 18 years or older and you're going to show your face backstage, pull up. Let's see what you got. Or you could set up a formal debate. Pick your poison.
I guess I'll go. Yeah, so if you're asking like how I appraise these sorts of things, is most of these are I usually like classify in the realm of entertainment more than like really I don't know what you would call it, like formal argumentation. No one is really making like arguments proper, where you have like, you know, strings of declarative sentences, you have premises, you have conclusions that are licensed by valid or cogent inferences. And really there's only 4 kinds of arguments really that anyone can make. They're either going to be Bayesian or one of the 3, like deductive, inductive, or abductive. And you had mentioned, I think you mentioned something like theoretical virtues or explanatory power. That's a form of inference to the best explanation, or abductive reasoning. And you know, like there's boilerplate arguments that you can make, and people should just make those, because those are the only sorts of arguments that are like what I would consider rationally compelling. Everything else just it seems to me like wasting. I mean, they're entertainment, but like in terms of like furthering the discussion, I don't think are much. And I was thinking, because I was talking with Charles, and I was saying like, well, maybe some of the openings aren't really landing or making contact with some of the people you're talking to. And I was thinking, like, if I was free grace, that like the style of argument, let's say, I'd make is those two, the Bayesian, where it's like, okay, we would expect people to mention the lake of fire and like almost everywhere if it was relevant in these contexts. But the second, if you're going with the explanatory power route, I would say, well, if we're considering a soteriological position, first we have to agree on the explanandum that sort of cries out for explanation. And the second is, okay, well, let's suppose that we can agree on what that explanandum is, and then we can sort of try to figure out what the best explanation would be. And I was thinking, well, first we have to see if there's any promises, like we could say like soteriological promises, you could say about the eternal state, and whether they're conditional or unconditional. I know that's sort of like loaded terminology, but you can always disambiguate and say, well, it's conditional in this respect, and we can talk about that. And the second thing that I would consider like relevant scriptural data or datum is you could say so-called warning passages, and whether or not those are real or hypothetical. And so you carve out the conceptual space into the 4 categories of unconditional. This is like, I don't know if other people use this terminology, but I would say like unconditional and real, unconditional and hypothetical, conditional and real, unconditional and hypothetical. And then first we have, then what I would say, we have to motivate some hermeneutic or methodology for, you know, to get the you could say the raw data of the scripture into data that's parsable for this kind of analysis. You need some exposition. And so I think like what favors free grace perhaps, and the method that I think has to be affirmed, is a historical grammatical method. And that's where you affirm 3 general theses that the Bible communicates through the normal use of words and grammar, that it can be understood through ordinary means, and it could be understood by the original audience. And that does a lot of work. So you have, I mean, you can motivate that. I won't get into that here, but I think once that's motivated, then a lot of these arguments really get off the ground, because you can make arguments that we should be taking these to be conditional only on belief or something like that, and that these warnings are not hypothetical from that sort of methodology. Sorry if that was a long-winded response, but that was my thought.
No, I'll tell you what, before you heard what that reminds me of. There is an atheist, Jeffrey Lauder. I interviewed him on my YouTube channel, and he has an excellent YouTube series where he goes through Gregg arguments, and what he does is he classifies the kinds of arguments that you can use, and of course they all fit into your 4 buckets. But he says, if you're going to get involved in formal debate, on Philreg and for God's existence, etc. These are the only kind of arguments you can use, and this is the classification of them. And if you actually understand the classifications of arguments, it makes you both a better debater, and more importantly, it makes you better at knowing the kinds of arguments people are sharing, and you can be a better critic. And but most people don't. They don't want to take the time to learn argumentation.
Ashley, I don't know where. 1 second, Howdy. Ashley, I don't know where to turn the names on at. They changed things in here, so I got to find the place for that. Go ahead, Howdy.
I think I talked to Charles about this earlier too, and I don't think it's really even that much of an intellectual problem. I mean, I think part of it, I don't think it's like clearly articulated what's like rationally compelling about the sorts of arguments that are being made. But I guess I have the capacity to take what's being said and sort of cast them into that sort of language or whatever. But I don't think that is that is sort of a problem, but I don't think that's the main barrier, let's say, to motivating people to adopt free grace or something like that. Really, what I think is you could say a stumbling stone is this sin. They think that if you're free grace, you're taking a sort of attitude towards sin that's sort of like reprehensible or repulsive. It's right. This I think that's what's really preventing a lot of this. And what I would do, this is what I told to Charles, because I think that's what the problem is. Like if the goal is to like actually convince people, and sometimes arguments aren't better. Sometimes what's needed is something what's called rhetoric or the art of persuasion, where you sort of say, okay, why aren't they? And then it seems to be like it's this. And so what should we say about that? And I would say, if I had an opening, I would devote almost half my time to addressing the concerns, which I think are like, they're not sort of, I think their concerns are worthy of consideration, worthy of, saying something about, like give some sort of story. But really there's only a handful of articulable objections to free grace along those lines. They can say, well, one is like, okay, free grace is just bad or false because I'm incredulous. But okay, there's a funny phrase in philosophy when someone argued, he said, all I get met with is like an incredulous stare, and I don't have a response to that. But you don't need a response to that because their sort of objection isn't really right. Their objection is non-responsive, so there's nothing to work with there. The other is if free grace is true, then sin is okay. Then it's okay. No, sin is like the worst condition for anyone, and let's talk about how bad sin is, and why would you think that if you need like and we can talk about all that stuff. Or they'll say like, okay, well, if free grace is true, then there's no reason to avoid sin. And we can dispute that too. You could say, well, prudentially, there's temporal judgment or post-resurrection reward, which is how most people answer it. Or you could say, well, morally, because one ought to do good analytically, like Dittmar suggested. Or you could throw, there are lots of arguments in philosophy of ethics about why people should do good. Like, if you're a realist, like there's tools available that you could furnish to combat that. And the last one, which I think was touched on in the debate, or some of the comments, is like, well, free grace, then all one has to do is believe for one moment. So they're like, you're sort of like cheapening, like they'll say like easy believism or something like that. And then I liked your response, because that's I don't know if, I'm sure people have said it before, but this is what I was thinking immediately. It's like, okay, well, sure, but if that's the case, free grace isn't really unique in this regard. I don't think there is a position other than universalism that avoids this sort of objection, because if you're if you think someone has to persevere in the end, all you're doing is, instead of privileging the initial moment of belief, you're privileging the final moment of belief, and it's just one moment. So like, it's the same sort of thing. I don't understand like how your position is better in that regard. Or they think they're conditionalist, like, well, you have to do you have to do X number of works. Okay, and you can ask how many, but I don't ask that question, because people say, oh, we don't know. I would say, like, is there a hard determinate line? Like, does God like, are they so like, does God know what that limit is? Yes. Right. Okay, so then you're saying, like, if I was just a little bit, if I smiled just a little bit harder and waved a little bit harder that one time, like, oh, you barely missed out. And I don't think, like, surely that's just as objectionable because it seems like the intuition is, well, that's sort of like arbitrary or capricious. It's like, okay, well, I don't think that's what. Maybe that is a ding against free grace, but it's not a ding that's that what's called a I don't know, where it hits everyone equally, so nothing changes. I forget the word for that, but yeah, that's sorry again for going on, but now I'm finished for real.
I want to say this about Top Protect and Serve, who I already called to pull up and he hasn't yet. But he says there's no such thing as repeating a sinner's prayer. Yeah, there is. People repeat sinner's prayers all the time. But here's the thing. Nobody needs to say a sinner's prayer to be saved. That's not Free Grace's argument. Learn Free Grace's argument before you repeat some cliche argument that isn't even ours.
Yeah, that's fine.
Chris, I know you've had a
Go
ton
ahead.
of questions tonight. In your last debate with Matt S., you gave an excellent answer regarding Hebrews 10 about no more sacrifice remaining. I was recently listening to a podcast on the Levitical sacrificial system and realized how much I don't know about the Levitical sacrificial system. And once I am still learning, but especially after listening to it, Hebrews 10 was like a lot for me in that sense, right? Because as you, and for anyone who hadn't heard it, as you yourself had pointed out during that debate, when the writer says that there's no sacrifice for sin that remains, he's speaking as if he's speaking from the mindset of the people who would be defecting, right? Because they'd be saying, hey, we're not sure about this Jesus thing, but we're going to just go back and do our thing with Judaism. And it's okay because under that Levitical sacrificial system, there's this sin offering that we can give for this. And there's this offering that we can give for that. And he's telling them, no, none of that's relevant anymore. The only thing you have to expect is judgment. Now, my question to you is, and I'm sure you've touched on this at some point somewhere, so forgive me, but do you find, my intuition tells me that there's relevance in the fact that in that verse in, I think, 10:23, the writer says that the only thing they have to expect is not fearful judgment which will come upon them, but fearful judgment which will, I think it says, consume the adversaries, as if it's like this other group of people. Do you find any significance in that, or am I just in my head?
Let me answer that roundabout and then see if this answers your question. The word consuming takes me right to, it's requoted in Hebrews 12, and this goes back to Deuteronomy 6, where our God is a consuming fire. And so I think the idea is if you go back to the Levitical system, then the problem is there's no covering for you. And there's a technical reason for that. And I'll mention that in a minute. But because there's no covering for you, what that makes you is an enemy. And because you're an enemy, you will be consumed by God. Now, having said that, there's a whole PSA, penal substitution atonement argument has to happen here. But the argument, the big thing, the Levitical system, we have terribly misunderstood. The Hebrew word kafar does not mean something like penal substitution. It literally means cover, to cover over. And in my mind, the best modern illustration to get you an idea of what was happening in the Levitical system was when you put on a hazmat suit to go into, or a fire suit to go into a dangerous place. Yeah. What that suit does is let you go into a dangerous place without being destroyed. So what the Levitical system does is it doesn't expiate sins. It doesn't clean and remove sins. What it does, the Levitical system, is it puts a covering over me so that when God is in my presence, I'm not destroyed by his presence. The covering, the blood it puts a buffer between me and God.
Correct.
What that means then is that if I go to God without that covering, then any sin that I've committed, I'm going to be destroyed by that same God. So what it's saying is that Levitical system no longer provides the covering. That covering is now only found in Jesus.
Yep.
I don't know if that's my roundabout answer as far as whether that's relevant to you. You can decide the question they're asking, but that's
so would you say then that in that verse, this idea of consume is still pretty open-ended regarding what that even is, though? Because it could, I mean, sure, like it could be possible, not necessarily from the text, but just possible that it could mean eternal damnation. But it could just mean discipline, or
it just means discipline. Now it just means it means destruction. So now what kind of destruction is there? Well, I mean, that's consistent with hell, but just because something is consistent does not make it warranted. And so if you look at the Deuteronomy 6, where it comes from, God wasn't presumably sending people to hell whom he consumed. That's not what he did. He was cutting them off and destroying them. So what could it look like? It could look like lots of things. It could look like ruin. It could look like death. It could look like loss of rewards. It could look like, I mean, God only knows. It could look at more persecution with AD 70 just around the corner. It could look like being crucified and burned. There's so many things it could be. The point is, don't do it.
Yeah, and I think given the fact that there's so much of the imagery in Hebrews regarding what happened in Numbers when they rebelled and then, were forced to wander. I mean, that was a very severe judgment in which they lost their lives. And yet, even after the fact, they're still called his people. He says he didn't allow their feet to swell up, their clothes to tear, all these different things. And so we see how there was this kind of temporal, I don't want to call it discipline, but severe chastisement. And yet that did not speak to the ultimate sense of, because like a lot of people think that every last Israelite who wandered in the wilderness 20 and up went to hell, and it's like I don't know how you pull that from the text, right? It's this scripture's completely open-ended on that's an open question. What we do know is that they were disciplined temporally for those actions, and so I think Hebrews is a constant pulling from that event and just not following in that same pattern of unbelief. I think that's noteworthy, to say the least. At least, thank you.
So I figured out what it is. Watch. Whenever I remove the comment, the names appear again. But if I have a comment up there, they get rid of the names.
Go away.
It took me forever to figure that out. Yeah.
Wait, can I ask a question? It's not related to the debate. Chris, as a pastor, what is your schedule like? Do you wake up whenever, or is it dependent on your kids or what?
So I have two jobs. I'm a part-time pastor and I'm a part-time chaplain. And so I do all the driving around for my kids. So I'm up every day between 6 and 7, have my kids where they need to be at 8 o'clock. And then I have full days. I'm back at home between 5 and 6. And then I work on my dissertation from about 6 to about 9 every single day.
Okay. Nice.
You should not be up here right now. Like I'm going to, oh my God.
Well, it's a holiday. You don't have school tomorrow, right?
It's a holiday, and
Okay.
this is my last scheduled debate for a while, and I probably won't accept a light debate anytime soon because I need to make some progress. Now, if the big one comes up, that's fine, but I've got to get through chapter 2 of my dissertation, and I've got to get chapter 3 written.
Just out of curiosity, what are you writing your dissertation on?
What is a clinically, so I'll show you the short version. It's I'm doing a substantive grounded theory on how board certified chaplains assess spiritual health in a critical realism frame. What the crap does that mean? In other words, chaplains, board certified chaplains, work in hospitals and hospices. They talk to people who are spiritually healthy or spiritually unhealthy. What do they mean by that? How do they come up with that? And then so that we can come up with a rubric to understand what that term means, because there's about 20 different ways in the literature to understand what that term means.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's something that medical professionals will get genuine. It's a proper science paper. If you think social science is science, it's a proper science paper.
Soft science.
Yeah.
Oh, what about when Steve brought up the point? We kind of like reverted to factory settings. He's like, nobody believed what you believed in the early church. I was like, dude.
There are a couple of arguments that I have got to figure out how to not show my frustration at. The history argument is one of them, and the pointing your finger and accusing you of a nasty sin is the other one. I just think both of those are disingenuous. Like, if you're not Catholic, I don't want to hear your argument for church history if you're not Orthodox or Catholic, because that's just. Now, I have good historical reasons, I think, that doesn't follow, but I'm just like, stop it.
I mean, it's also just like, you can just say that. It's just so easy to just toss out, and you don't even have the burden to prove that no one believed that. It's like, you're just shifting the burden on me to now prove that people believed what I did in the first century. Is like, you haven't even proven first that like no one believed that. So,
and there's a free grace guy, Valtteri Lena, Lorena, something like that, and he has
Walter.
a whole history blog. Say what?
Walter. That's Walter.
Oh, is it? I didn't know that. So he's got like dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens, like literally plural dozens of quotes, and I could pull them out, but I don't know them, and like I can't defend them in context. So like, why? I don't. That's such a gold move. My brain is gone. Moving the goalposts. I'm just like, stop it. I do not get my theology from church history, y'all.
Me and Charles were looking at some of this stuff, and that's not really a topic that really comes up all that much. But even when it does, it's not like free grace is like interpretively incapable of reading these in a way to where they're not that they don't falsify free grace. Now you can make arguments about how much you have to stretch the text to do that, but again, that's sort of like, I mean, show me who said free grace is false. Let me see it. You know?
Yeah, and like I said, and my thing, I respect historians too much, because like I know some historians who are, and plus I largely think of the biblical text and is historical analysis, right? So I'm not just gonna, well, Irenaeus says this and Justin says this and Cyprian says that. Okay, but have you done the actual exegesis of his work? Because just quoting him is not the same thing as doing the actual exegesis and then doing it in context. And that's just, again, I'm just going to go back to my point. When I read Galatians, they already were misunderstanding the gospel. In Corinthians, they were already misunderstanding the gospel. In Thessalonians, already misunderstanding. All of them, they're already misunderstanding the gospel. So why should I think that 200 years later, those guys would have it right? It's just ridiculous arguments.
Yeah, a lot of times too, people get more emphasis is placed on certain people just because they have the luxury of living during a certain time period and place. Because if Chris
write the history, as they say.
Well, yeah, and I guess what I'm more so saying is like, Chris, if you had been born like 1800 years ago or whatever, and you lived in the 1st or 2nd century, and we're saying what you're saying, people would be citing you, and nothing would be changing about the arguments you're making. It would just be the fact that you live at a certain time and place. And so I see the appeal, but I don't think that that's any sort of deciding factor.
I was going to say, like, Paul seems to, I feel so bad for Paul. He's saying so many things, like at some points, like outside of Ephesians, you get the impression that Paul is like worried that like all that he's ever done has been in vain because nobody is on board with it. You know, he's like,
right.
He's in tears. We've been struggling imagely. It's like it's rough.
Right. No, he's a hyper minority. And what I'll tell you what little church history I have done, like real church history, you find out like people get into Gnosticism. There is not, and I listen, this is a critical picture. I think this is right. There was not an early Christianity. There was early Christianities. And like, for example, Cerinthus, like people know a little bit about him, but he was probably like, he was a major figure, and he's driving more of the New Testament. People know what's going on. And these super apostles, that's a thing. Like, the idea that there was this monolithic early tradition that everybody believed the same thing, that's just nonsense. It was, spend any time, like there's this great YouTube channel. The dude's as liberal as they come. He's not a believer, but Justin Slade of Esoterica, man, he's got some good stuff on early like esoteric, like Gnostic stuff. It's not like Billy, whatever his last name is, nonsense. Like, this guy actually knows his material. It's good history. And so just to claim, oh, that's what nobody believed that. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, lots of heresies, even very early on, even by like their own lights.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy.
We couldn't even agree on the deity of Christ for like 300 years. Most people were Arian.
No, and if you read First John like I do, First John, which is what, call it written in 80. Some people think earlier, some people think later, 80, 90, whatever. I mean, whatever. So late 1st century, mid to late into the 1st century. You've got people already who were arguing, and again, especially if you're Cerinthian and Proto-Ebionite, who are already arguing that the Mosaic law is necessary to be saved, and that Jesus is an adoptionist. He came at the Spirit, then the Christ came on. And now, that just feels to a lot of Christians who don't think very deeply, and I'm not trying to be a jerk when I say that, like they're not scholars. that just feels like, oh, okay, there are these people out there with these weird ideas. No, these aren't just people with weird ideas. This was a dominant major view that was so serious and so widely known that John had to address it. They got their ideas from somewhere. It takes time for ideas to spread. And I just don't think people realize how topsy-turvy the first church was in terms of what it believed.
Yeah, there's so many Gnostics. Paul argues against Gnostics at length, and I think 3 epistles, and then also a lot of the apocrypha. So this is the thing: Paul's writing people letters. Paul isn't the only person at that time period with access to a pen and a paper and able to put. You've got like we have dozens of Gnostic texts from that time. You know, Gospel of Thomas, Apocrypha of Peter, all this others, the Mary stuff. And that's just what we've retained, and we had no interest in keeping that around.
Yep.
Like there's probably like comic books, like hundreds. I have the vision. And it's like it's rough, you know.
No, for sure. So that's how when people get into me and they say to me, "Oh, well, what did the early church say?" They were busy dealing with all this other stuff that this was already this was nowhere near on their radar. They had nested issues that they weren't even getting there. That's why for me, all you need is the scriptures. We're going to do an exegesis of the scriptures that Paul gave us, that James gave us. We can actually we can wade through the history later on. So that's why I just don't take the history argument seriously. I think it's a terrible argument.
Yeah, and it goes late too. Like even I was thinking Augustine was like a Manichaean. He didn't even know like what the Holy Spirit was. He thought some random dude from Arabia was the Holy Spirit. Like, what? How could you even come to that? Like that's.
Yep.
You know what the true Orthodox guy just said on X? He said, we debate everyone because we believe in sharing the gospel. And I don't believe he has the gospel. I don't believe he's evangelizing, but I understand he thinks that. I mean, that's why I think Church of Christ people are not afraid to evangelize. I mean, not afraid to debate because they think it's evangelism. So what's the excuse when a Catholic or an Eastern Orthodox turns down a debate? Y'all think...
Question.
Go ahead, Howdy.
Because it just popped up and I want to get test the room on this. I want everyone's opinion. What if, because like, let's assume that the gospel was like spoken before it was written down or something like that. What if they were just spreading it and then like everyone's gospels get confused and then like the gospels that we have are sort of them setting the record straight? Is that maybe?
I not only do I think that's plausible, I think that's probably right. That's probably exactly what happened. Is people were writing these things, especially the gospels themselves. So obviously, you know, Howdy, that this is just my reading of history. So you have Paul writing first, you know, James writes and then Paul writes, or vice versa, early stuff. But then the gospels come along because there are so many stories about Jesus, and they are in part polemical and in part theological. And while we're trying to lay out a certain view of who Jesus is, because you have all of these ideas, especially like when they're written is, you know, okay, so let's put Mark in the, I think a conservative date. Mark is mid to late 50s, right? And then you got Luke in, you know, mid to late 60s, and then John, you know, whenever you put him. That's early enough. Those gospels, when you were dealing with serious proto-Gnosticism, that's clear from the history. So I think they were doing that on purpose. Like, I think that's actually part of the reason they were doing it.
Yeah, and I think too, even within the narratives itself, like in Acts, right? You see how people from the circumcision party start intermingling with them, saying, "Hey, you can't be saved unless you do this, unless you abide by this." And I'm sure the it's funny when you try to put yourself in their shoes, because you probably had all these Gentiles who are, you know, fully grown adults, and all of a sudden they're talking about we need to get circumcised, and they're like, you guys need to straighten this out like pronto, because if that's the case, I mean, oh my goodness. And so yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if when things got out, it already started to get scrambled. And so we obviously won't know perfectly, but it does make me curious, right, to be a fly on the wall and just see how much confusion and chaos was, I guess you could say, disseminating from that original point.
Yes, Adam, we are discussing that. I think we're generally discussing it, but I mean, it's an after show, so whatever comes up that's relatively in the ballpark, we're going for. Especially when we're bored, because when you have a debate like that, that's such a blowout. There's not much to say. We're just waiting for the next person to challenge us.
Oh my gosh.
I would say like the general the cadence is I think he had a better voice and cadence than you. You seemed like a little jittery. It seemed like you're like, oh, he's getting to me or something like that,
That's probably true. He's got a radio voice, and I talk fast.
Yeah, he's been on radio for what?
Chris gives me vibes of like a professor, like a college professor of some sort, who's like just super into a certain topic, and it's like trying to get his students to engage with him, and they're just like staring at him. But
if I were a debate coach coaching me, I'd be like, dude, you have to slow down like 40% and cut half your points so you don't feel so stressed to get them all in. I know that up here, but it's all so much. I want to get this all in.
Yeah, but I'm the same way as you. So to you, you were speaking my language. And I'm like, oh, I get it perfectly.
Adam says he's going to be debating the Church of Christ in August. Cool. Would you like for us to do the after show for that?
I thought it was a bit unnecessary when he said, yeah, it's all metaphorical. And then he's like, just so I get clear, you're saying this is metaphorical. He's like, yeah, all that's not metaphorical. That. And he's like, and then I felt like I don't know about that. I don't know. Like,
yeah, no, I thought about letting it go, but I wanted the audience, maybe I'm wrong, because I know you've seen me do that like 3 times now, but I know that there are people from his channel who are going to watch, and they had never seen that before. So I wanted them to see that. That's the only reason I went through it. It wasn't necessary, but I wanted them to name it over and over and over and over again.
And Chris, I've told you, in the past time I talked with you, that I think one of my favorite things about just the way you work through things is, even if you and some other person may not perfectly agree, you're always promoting us to try to question like our assumptions or the things that we lead into the text with. And it's cool because I feel like when you do that for so long and just so repeatedly, you hear arguments from certain people and you're just like, how did you even get there, right? Because we've spent so much time unlearning how to do all of that. I was listening to and I know you haven't had a chance to listen yet, but I was listening to that debate between Ryan from NeedGod.net and Trent Horn. And, they talked about a bunch, but at one point in particular, when Ryan had cited in Acts, I believe chapter 16, to the Philippian jailer that he needed to, what must I do to be saved? Just believe on the Lord, right? Well, Trent clapped back by saying, well, hey, it doesn't say that he just believed. It says that he actually went and got baptized afterwards. So clearly this proves that there's some sort of relationship with, and I'm just thinking to myself, like, earlier in the book of Acts, when you have a bunch of people believe, they immediately get all of their occultic books and their divination books and burn them, right? So if someone doesn't do that immediately, does that mean that they're not saved? Right? And I'm just like, and it was such a fast-paced debate. I'm obviously not part of it, so I'm just sitting there talking to myself. But I genuinely think that just a lot of what I've learned from watching you, reading your stuff, as well as other free gracers, and really anyone who's just trying to be honest with the text and exegete.
Y'all can tell me that I'm wrong on this, but I genuinely believe this. Maybe I'm wrong, but I genuinely believe this myself. I don't think my theology informs the text. I really don't. People say, oh, everybody says. I don't think mine does. I will say this, and I mean this. I think my methodology informs my interpretations. I have an extremely conservative methodology, and I'm very, very rigorous on my methodology. I just don't think that my theology has a predeterminative factor in what the text means or can't mean. I genuinely don't think that it does. I think my methodology is determinative. And that's what I want people to learn. What's your methodology?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's mainly where I'm working at, because I can't convince you to believe like me, and you probably shouldn't believe like me just because I say something, which most people don't anyway. But if I can give you a methodology, a procedure that you can apply in your own Bible study or your articulation of things, then I think that's a win. and so that's where I try to focus at.
Yeah, it's hard for me because I want to say my theology does not inform it. I'm just nervous about saying that and then actually having that be the case. You know, that's clearly my goal, and I know it's everyone's goal. And I will say I think it's less than others for sure, because I mean there are some cases where it's just so. I mean, just with the brains God gave us, and you hear some ways people talk, it's clear that it is. But go ahead.
Let me say to what Ashley said here. She said, if you want us to learn that, you're going to have to speak in terms that we understand. I'm pretty smart. I didn't understand that. Fair. I have a habit of doing that. I'm just talking in here. All I mean, Ashley, and anybody who ever watches this, is there are two ways that I know of, and maybe more, but there are two ways to come up with a belief. This text says that. One way is to start with a pre-existing belief, and free gracers do this, and I don't think they should. I have seen Bob Wilkin himself do this on dozens, and I mean dozens of articles. He'll take a problem passage and he'll say, well, it can't mean this because that quote's not over there. Therefore, because it can't mean this, it must mean this other thing. So he comes to the text with an idea, with a set of categories that he's defined from elsewhere. And if he's allowed to do that, then so are Catholics and Calvinists and everybody else. So that's one way, is to start with your pre-existing ideas and bring your ideas to the text. The other way is to say, well, how I interpret the Bible will give me what I'm allowed to say. And that's important. What am I allowed to say? And then if the text doesn't warrant you, it doesn't matter if you think it's true. You have your method, the way you read the Bible, your hermeneutics, that has to determine it. So how do you, like, I saw him do a discussion on John 15 where he was very strict on his methodology. Well, what was the background? He used the word poetics. What's the background that they shared? And what are you allowed to say? And that's the question. I think our methodology is what's really important here. Your hermeneutics, your rules for interpreting scripture.
Well, I mean, at one level, I don't really find it objectionable because if we affirm something like non-contradiction, then Jesus can't contradict Paul or vice versa, or, other things like that. And so in some sense, so I agree with like Gadamer, like no one comes to this like as a tabula rasa, blank slate. Like everyone has baggage when they read it. If you had absolutely no baggage, you'd pick it up and it would just be like scribbles on a paper, and you would just it wouldn't mean anything. So everyone has like their horizon, all of what they think coming into it. You could say they're priors if we're casting it into Bayesian terminology. So that's unavoidable, I think. What you can do is try to understand what those are, maybe some of the biases that you might have. But I mean, even I don't think it's like objectionable to use a theory to better understand or to explain data, because I think that's like the point of a theory. Like I'm not sure what else you would use it for. So I don't really find it objectionable. What I would find objectionable is, well, one, you have to motivate that theory, and then how are you doing that is the main one. But the second is, okay, well, I'm happy that you saw that. You put all the, you could say the grammatical possibilities on the table, and then you have to decide, and
right, which one?
You sort of you have to understand that there's more than one, and you have to put them all out there, and then you have to give your reasons for deciding. And I think you can appeal to some general theory, but then you have to motivate that theory. But the thing is, usually the theory is like the contention of the debate. So appealing to it is you're appealing to the thing in question, which isn't going to rationally compel anyone, I don't think.
Quick question.
Yeah. Can I give a practical example, which I think Steve did this and he deflected it back to Chris, where he's like, Chris claims that I'm using my theology to drive my interpretation, but he does the same thing. It was in John 12, where I think he didn't actually give any reason or evidence for why the belief there is non-authentic, other than to appeal to the fact that there are different kinds of belief, just abstractly, in Scripture there are different kinds of belief, which is the very thing we're kind of discussing, right? That you guys were discussing. So he didn't actually prove anything. If you want to weigh the evidence in John 12 alone, I think you had way more evidence, like by a mile.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the key, right? Oh, I'm sorry, Dietmar, go ahead.
No, sorry, I was done.
Yeah, and that's the key, because I think as I was listening to you guys, I realized that's why I was a bit hesitant to put myself in the same camp as Chris, because I agree that my methodology guides my interpretation of the text. But then, as Howdy so greatly said as well, when you reach that place where there's a controversial text, it could be like a certain word could be translated one of two ways, right? How do I know that I'm not just choosing this one translation to fit what I want it to say versus another? I think that's where I get a little loose sometimes, and I'm like, I'm not sure. But I think most of the time context and things like that help. I just do know that there have been times where it's like, am I just choosing this alternative translation just because I can, or because it's actually what's most warranted by what's being discussed, and so just trying to be humble enough about that. And I'm not saying you're not humble, Chris. I'm just
I guess I appreciate
it. But I want to say something just to kind of encourage people as well too, because I did see a comment earlier saying how it was saying something about like the practical effects of these sorts of discussions and these sorts of things. And as someone who was more recently introduced to like a lot of these free grace ideas, I can say from experience that something like the book of James for me has had so much more weight and meaning now compared to the way it's just commonly interpreted. Before, when I just saw it as this thing of like, hey, you need to shape up or you're going to be eternally condemned, it just became this thing where it's like, okay, well, I know all these other texts seem to say the exact opposite. So all it's really doing when I read this book is just creating this strife over where I'm trying to figure out exactly what it means, rather than actually taking away a message that I can actually do anything with, right? I don't think the intent of James's epistle was so that we could just sit there and then cross-reference it with all these other things trying to figure it out. But when I'm convinced of this exegetically, that James is speaking about the profitability of our faith in terms of how we actually live out in the world and how it affects the people around us, all of a sudden, that just massively illuminates it, right? Because now it's no longer, hey, let me be this armchair theologian, but it's like, hey, if I want to actually change the world, like I've got to actually go out and minister to the people who need it, minister to the people who are in need of encouragement or whatever it may be. And I think it gave a lot more practicality to my faith that I felt like I was lacking before, which is ironic, right? Because the other side are the ones who are saying that it's this message of you're going to be eternally condemned if you don't shape up. That's going to motivate good behavior. So something I wanted to share, I found interesting.
Ooh, can I say one more thing on John 3:18, which is you're making the whole argument, right? That the unbeliever here is defined as someone who has not believed, making it premise by premise, sentence by sentence. And then when you get near to the conclusion, Steve's like, oh, now you're being tricky. And then he just jumps to Matthew 7. And he's like, people do this with Matthew 7, where they say, oh, look, they were never known. So he's just going to a totally different passage, but not answering the point you're making there.
Right.
Like, dude.
Man.
I don't know. What did you think when he did that?
It was just my response is, I'm not being tricky. I'm just reading the text. There wasn't any Greek here. It was just, I showed you the Greek, but it's half believed. That's the perfect. You don't have to know all that stuff. No, you're being tricky. No, I'm not. I'm just reading the text right in front of us.
I mean, there's no trick. If there's any trickiness perceived by him, it's because the conclusion leads there. He doesn't like the conclusion, right? Like he could have made an explanation like, oh, John 3:18, yeah, the unbeliever there is someone who's never believed, but it's not all encompassing. There are other types of unbelievers that believe for a little bit and then fall away. I've heard that before. They say John 3:18 is like not all encompassing.
Yeah, JP Uncut has said that. Yeah,
I don't think that's a good interpretation, because the believer part is all encompassing. It's about whoever believes, right? So it'd be weird to like restrict the second half of it. But he didn't make that. He's just like, oh, you're being tricky. That's not an explanation. That's like the worst possible response you can give.
I think what he's trying to say is something like, well, there's levels of faith, great faith and little faith, and you have to have a certain amount of faith to push you over the top.
That's like, this is something I noticed. I don't know if I agree with Chris on this. I do think there are degrees of faith in some respect. Like I forget in Thessalonians, or you can strengthen your faith, you can have a more profitable faith. But notice that like all those adjectives are augmenting the faith. Like the faith is still the faith. It's never called into question that it's real faith. So whenever you see belief in John 3:16 or faith on its own, that doesn't give you the right to change it into like a specific kind of belief. If all those other types of belief are all like authentic belief, then that's all you need. Any of those forms, not one particular one, you know? If you understand.
Yeah, the argument. Yeah, it's what's funny is as I just came up with an argument off the top of my head with Charles yesterday, and it's almost exactly this sort of thing that he ran. It's like, okay, well, let's just assume that he thinks, okay, well, there's faith on its own means what it means, and he agreed with him on that. Except he also has faithfulness and some other. Okay, let's agree to the lexical, definition of it. Okay, then we have New Testament authors who modify the lexeme adjectively, and these adjectives seemingly have, you could say, two kinds of connotations: a positive connotation and a negative connotation. A living faith and a dead faith, a demonic faith and a, So we have good faith and bad faith, broadly. Like if and I mean good and bad, not morally. I mean that as like purely like evaluative or axiological. Okay, so we have that. That's it. We have that. Now the question is, when we see faith on its own, do we have three choices technically? Either faith on its own by the New Testament authors refers to both, or one or the either. And I suspect he's going to try to make arguments that when faith is on its own by what's called conversational implicature, we can assume that he's talking about the good faith. Something like that is probably the sort of argument.
That's theology driving your interpretation. That's what that is. But yeah, go on, sir.
No, I was finished. I mean, that's sort of like, I don't think that's a response to that sort of argument. You would have, well, he didn't really formalize the sort of that sort of, I would say an argument along those lines, and he didn't really even, to my lights, make an argument. But I think an argument could be made there, and then you could object to like the premises or something like that.
I mean, it was implied that every time he sees this belief in a salvific framing, that because of his theology, this is the positively framed belief. It's the living faith, right? So I don't know what gives him the right to like go to one particular kind of faith and make the word faith just implicitly mean that always. I don't know how he can do that.
So I touched on this here in this after show early on, but the idea, this is what I was saying. I don't, in principle, let's say faith 1, faith 2, subscript, faith subscript 1, faith subscript 2, where one is a good faith, one is a bad faith. And you can argue that given a sufficient sample size, that conversational implicature means faith 1, and in certain cases it's faith 2, and here is our linguistic pragmatic flags. And it looks like something like when someone doesn't love, then it's faith 2. And when they do love, therefore it's faith 1. And the salvific faith applies to faith 1 as opposed to faith 2. In principle, I don't actually have a linguistic problem with that. And linguistics and methodology is where I'm going to hold the line. Now, the problem that I would have with that approach, though, is if you're going to claim that, you have to have a way to distinguish once you come to the text. The distinction is just the linguistic markers, the pragmatics we just shared. Well, except for the fact that you need something in the text itself to justify that initial breakdown, where what the reason we have faith more like this and the reason we have faith true like this, what justifies that? Because very often what happens in the real world is the way people make those distinctions is by their theological analysis. So because I think that you can't lose your salvation, or because I think that true faith always produces good works, I say, therefore, John 12 is an example of someone who hasn't really believed. So if you're going to put a theologically motivated category, which is not in principle problematic, I need something in the text itself, in the corpus of the text, that justifies explicitly that distinction of categories. And that's the thing that I don't see. What looks to me is those categories are ad hoc or post hoc created so that we can justify a pre-existing interpretation. That's my worry. I don't know if that makes sense, Howdy, but that's what I'm getting at.
Well, I don't think you can object to that. If by categories, I'm just saying like faith is adjectively referred to in positive and negative ways, that I don't think that is disputable. What is disputable is because what he needs is to say that there's a default assumption that when faith is used unmodified, that it's referring to only this good faith.
Right. Right. So the question is, where does the data come for that particular reading?
Okay, so
that's my worry.
So you might see faith unmodified, and something good happens, and maybe he would say, well, it would be strange if the faith hits both classes of faith in these contexts. We would assume that, like, if something good happens, then presumably it's the good kind of faith, or if something bad happens, it's the bad kind of faith. So, for example, there's because of economy of speech, people will say things, and then by the rules of conversational norms, we can infer quite a lot off of very little that's being said. So, like the classic, I ate all the grapes, I'm talking about all the grapes in my fridge, even though I don't have to say it. Right. So the universal quantifier is restricted by the context. And then that context isn't even stated. Like, I don't even have to say, I'm in my room and I ate all the grapes. Like, I can just say I ate all the grapes, and it's assumed, like, because we have background information about the world as such, that eating all the grapes in the universe was like very incredible. Okay, so this happens in other ways too. So, for example, I could say, well, he was running. Or no, sorry. I can say he's running. And the other guy could say when. Well, when we're talking, like, when we're verbing, the usual, like, default assumption is the temporal index is now, and I don't have to say now and then say what I need to say. It's just assumed. There's, like, default settings on some of the terminology that we use in just everyday speech. And so he would have to say something like, well, the default terminology of faith as such in this literature corpus is that based on the fact that there's adjectival modifications to faith in positive and negative ways, and unmodified faith can lead to good and bad things, we can assume that when it does something good, like give you eternal life, it's probably talking about the good kind of faith, something like that. And that's really nebulous. I'm sure, like, that could be formalized a little bit better, but it's something like that. It's good thing happened, so it has to be good kind of thing, something like that.
And so the only thing I'll say is I'm sympathetic to that, but the problem is it needs to be built out in a way that there is sufficient evidence to warrant. So this is your Bayesian thing, right? Is this what you actually find? And that can be done rigorously. In principle, I don't think it can be done in practice because I don't think it's true, but it can be done rigorously. So then somebody needs to do it, because they're not. What they're doing is they're just appealing, like Steve did by my lights and my assessment. What he did tonight was he rejected John 12:42-43, but then turns around and accepts it in 12:44 as being, we'll call it salvific faith. Well, why? And there's nothing in the text that gives him that. If he had the framework built like you talked about, that's one thing, but he doesn't have that. And so where do you get that from? Your grapes example is we know where that data comes from, because we know physiologically I can't eat all the grapes. So where is, again, I'm going to ask, what's the motivation for building out these kinds of faith 1, faith 2? And I need to see that, because I didn't get it tonight, and I've never seen anybody even start the process of making.
Not to interrupt, but I'm gonna bounce for the night, guys. But hope you guys have a good rest of your discussion.
God bless.
Chris, get some sleep, man.
I'm about to, actually. Yeah. I appreciate it.
But I really enjoyed talking with you guys. Enjoyed the debate. Everyone have a great night. Thanks.
Thank you much.
God bless.
Nice talking to you.
I almost want to treat faith like a technical definition. And what I mean by that is I don't think the word belief or faith is actually changing. I think even the adjective added to it is not actually changing the kind of faith. I think what it's doing is it's contextually limiting the term faith. So if we look at adjectives as contextually limiting the noun that they modify, then it doesn't mean necessarily that there's different types of faith. It just means that the word faith is qualified or restricted to what we mean by the word that's attached to it. So I don't think the term faith is changing.
Here's the thing: whenever anyone makes an argument, there's two responses to an argument. Well, I guess three, but there's two responses to an argument that you can give. You can reject the inference, and assuming that the other person is competent in forming arguments, that's not going to be an option. The second is, if you reject the conclusion, then you have to reject one or more premises. Mm-hmm. And so good arguments sort of, you want to force your opponent into biting the bullet. And I think if I was given, ample time and resources, I could formulate this argument to where you would have to be committed to saying that in all cases, unmodified faith, when used by the New Testament authors, also includes demonic faith. So if Jesus says faith saves, that includes demonic faith. If he says faith gives you great reward, that includes demonic faith. Anything, because otherwise you would also, if you're on the horns. Either unmodified faith includes demonic faith everywhere where it's unmodified, or you accept the possibility that we can restrict the classes or the and I don't like, because you guys are, I understand like you're resistant to saying, well, there's different kinds or different types or different levels or something like that. But if you deny that everywhere faith is unmodified, that it includes demonic faith, then you just then you can't object to the kind of argument that he's making, I feel.
Well, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to respond to all of that because I don't necessarily fully understand all of that. But this is what I do know. Faith doesn't change. The issue is who is the one exercising the faith. Demons are not human. Jesus didn't die for humans, and that's why their faith doesn't save theologically. Now, in that passage, remember, it's about being saved from temporal judgment whenever a person is being apathetic. They have the right doctrine, but they're apathetic. Even demons are not apathetic. They're moved by what they believe to be true. When the demons said to Jesus, are you come to torment us before the time? Those were not apathetic demons. They were scared to death demons. And so I think that's James's point. James is saying that even the demons have a reaction. Y'all are acting like you have no reaction. You're looking at the rich people, you're catering to them. And that's why you're told in the very beginning in 2:1, don't hold your faith with an attitude of partiality. And so if you continue with this apathetic attitude toward the orphan, the widow, these people like this, I'm going to bring judgment. And your right doctrine is not going to save you from that. And you should be scared of this and react even as the demons do. It's sort of like when you're watching Lion King and the hyenas say Mufasa and they shiver. It's to say it again, Mufasa. At least the demons, at least the hyenas have a reaction, and the Christian needs to have a reaction. It should not be apathetic or callous towards injustices in the church. That's how I would unpack that.
I would just say that I think I have a principled reason. I don't think it's theology. I think I have a principled reason, and they're both lexical and then phenomenological, to use your language resistant to kinds of faith. This is just my phenomenological analysis of faith generally, and also just lexically what the word means, and then semantic domains. And so, again, I'm not opposed the idea that you can refer to different kinds with the same word. That's a possible thing that language can do. But just because language can do it, you need to give me, not you personally, you whoever. If I'm going to buy into that, that's not the normal usage of language without justification. So it's normal to do that, but it's normal to do that with justification. That's all I'm saying.
And Catechumen, I'm glad you find my explanations interesting. Let me know when you find out if you can refute them. I'm not saying I'm always right, but I would like to hear.
Well, I mean, I'd just be repeating myself, and maybe I'd have to. I don't know a way of reiterating in different language, but I think that you can accept that he's allowed to make that move, or if you reject it, then I think you're forced to say that faith unmodified would include both the positive and the negative connotations. So if you see something like faith has great reward, that includes a living faith and a dead faith, like all the ways that it's modified. If you don't, then you are also making the same sort of move.
Yeah. Apologies. I don't see the problem with just. I don't see the problem with just collapsing it, biting the bullet. It's all the same, and we follow the text where the text goes. I know that's you're seeing more, and I trust that you're seeing more, but I'm not seeing what you're seeing.
Yeah, and I haven't ran Howdy's argument through ChatGPT yet, super layman yet, so I'm still processing everything Howdy's saying, and Howdy may be right, but he's got to work on it to explain it to us where we can understand it better. And
well, do you think when the New Testament authors use faith, they'll sometimes use faith and only be referring to faith in Jesus even?
So you're talking about usage. You're not talking about definition or meaning. Two different things.
No, I'm talking about pragmatics. I'm never making a semantic argument here. I'm making
Okay. So yeah, there are times whenever faith is restricted by the object.
Okay, and so we can, without using the preposition in him, we can assume that when the New Testament authors, by economy of speech, they don't have to say faith in him and Jesus, faith, and then they give the paragraph of what they're talking, the kind of faith that they're talking about. They can just say faith, and it's understood between the speaker and the audience that.
The term faith didn't change.
Here's the thing.
When we know about the object.
I think a concrete example is Ephesians 2:8-9, where so grace through faith. That's clearly implied faith in Christ, even that the economy of language doesn't state it explicitly.
Well, the thing is, I would say oftentimes it's not just about like implicit understanding. The context would also show it. Like if you read a few verses before the chapter before, so we don't really have to even assume what kind of faith.
Well, they would.
Professing, is that you?
Well.
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure.
Is it you, Charles? Is that really you?
I think so.
I want to hear the rest of Howdy's argument because he's trying to develop this, and I want to see where he goes with it.
Well, that was it, and just said, well, the difference that because he wants to say, well, what we're doing isn't the sort of thing that they're doing, and he said we have context, and I said, well, I mean, they would have by their lights context. Like if it's referring to like a good thing, then it's probably referring to the good. I don't know what language to use. The good the positive adjective faith.
Well, here's the thing though, faith in and of itself is good. That's James's point, right? Believing is still good on its own, but having these extra works is even better. It augments the faith and it's even better. So I don't think it's a really strong argument to even suggest that like if you have this extra good faith, that this is the faith it's always talking about when it's talking about everlasting life. Faith on its own is still good. Even if you have a dead faith, there's still an element of that that's good. At least you believe, right? At least you have this.
But for this, all I have to say is that there's I guess you could say like you reject that demonic and dead and unproductive and useless and all of that type of language doesn't have negative connotations, I guess is what you're saying.
No, it has negative connotations, but I'm saying when it says you believe that there's one God, you do well, even the bare belief is still good, right? Isn't that what you're saying?
Yeah, but that's not the argument I'm making.
I know the argument you're making, if I'm not mistaken, is that it makes sense that the better framed belief, the one that's not the negatively framed one, is the one that will be assumed to grant everlasting life. Is that your argument? Or the one that you think they would make?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't know. pretty weak of an argument.
Like I said, I'm going to go back with keep saying I would need to have a sustained. What is the reason other than, well, because it can. Just what's the warrant? Because I think, lexical warrant, and I think I have philosophical and phenomenological warrant to think that that's just not the case. The word faith has an ontological referent, and I don't think the ontological referent changes between demonic faith and good faith, negative faith and positive faith. I just don't think the ontological, say this by in the bullet, the ontological referent does not change. Now, this is again a 20-year debate that we've had in Free Grace circles, and I have a strong position on now about what is the content.
Right. I'm not saying I can convince all of you guys to relinquish free grace off of this. So
I'm not. I don't think that you are. Although I think that your arguments are at least more interesting than what other people give. My point is just that I have nature of faith is probably where the conversation is not sufficiently discussed. And there's reasons for that. And I personally, I'm sure my view is different than Ditt's and Charles's, but I have a pretty highly developed understanding of the ontology of faith. And my ontology of faith doesn't give me the space the same way and I mean this in the same way that the language, I ate all the grapes. We understand ontological. That can't refer to all in the world because there's the way that sentence structure, what grapes are ontologically and the stomachs are. It just doesn't permit me.
Wait, so can I understand this better? So ontologically, the faith is fixed. Like the definition of faith is always fixed, irrespective of like what the verse says in terms of a faith that works or faith in a different object. Because that I agree with. Is that what you're saying?
Sort of, not exactly, but sort of. So I wouldn't say ontological the definition because that's mixing categories. Ontologically is what a thing is. The definition would be how the word itself. So I'm distinguishing. I have lexical, semantic, definitional reasons. I don't think that ever changes within the semantic domain. Recognizing the word can be use different things because it's polysemous. But then there's an ontological claim, which is what is faith, and that's not a linguistic question. That's phenomenological or some ontological. What is faith? And I don't think that faith is the kind of thing that is subject to the kind of breaking up that Howdy is proposing. I don't think it's the kind of thing.
Wait, let me understand this better. So is there a difference in your mind between the ontology of a word, like what is faith, and the definition? Aren't definitions meant to define like what a word is, or it's a little bit different?
No. In my view of linguistics, no. Definitions do not. Definitions have to do with language and usage, and they tell us how to use a word. They give us point, but the ontology of a word, the referent is the thing itself, is the actual thing in the world, be it the real external world, the mental world, that the thing actually refers to.
Okay. So I understand. So
meaning is found in
multiple. That's why you can have multiple definitions with the same ontology of word. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Makes sense. I think we agree then. I don't think I actually disagree with that.
So I have an ontological analysis of faith that I've done, and I won't do it tonight. So anyway, I'm about to crash, so I don't got a whole lot longer.
Well, what did you think about the debate? Because I assume you had your prepared opening, and it's sort of one that you've been using language that I've heard before. And then he had his. Okay, let me ask you a few questions. What were your initial thoughts when he's doing his opening about talking about general salvation, and then
my notes when he was discussing that was four-term fallacy. We're not here to discuss who is going to heaven or hell. I thought that the entire first 10 minutes and 1 second was him basically ignoring the debate's resolution. We were there to discuss the doctrine called once saved, always saved. And we all know what that word means. And he's going to say, well, but I think saved means something. Okay, whatever saved means, that's not the doctrine that we're here to discuss. So I kind of thought the whole thing itself was, well, once saved, always saved. You're not once saved, you're not always saved. You're using the word salvation different than I am, different than I define it. So I thought that was not helpful. So all the stuff on forgiveness and regeneration and sanctification and the modes and past, present, and future and what it means in most cases. I thought that was ridiculous. And it was after I also thought that all of that I could accept. And I have a note. As long as you tie the notion to abiding and not believing, everything he said in the first 10 minutes in 1 second, I can give double thumbs up to. Then at 10:02, for me, my timer on whatever the time was, I don't know. Then we started getting into his three little arguments, and he tossed out very, very quickly in his last 5 minutes. The only people who are believers are the ones who die believers, and that the present participle, the present ongoing thing, means that unbelievers are not believers anymore by definition. That's a present participle thing. He did that, and then he did the John 15 burning, cutting off thing, and then he closed it up by talking about Romans. So he gave us three arguments. He gave us a present participle argument, a John 15 argument, and a Romans 11 argument. That's pretty much all that I got out of him for his opening statement. And it was a bit frustrating because, and then his rebuttal, he literally just said, I don't think there are any warnings about hell, and I can't answer his questions, and I can't do all that exegesis.
Yeah, I had the follow up to that is because I actually thought that the debate would go there, and I was irritated, but I was reading a lot about verbal aspect and action SART, and I wanted to ask you, did you expect him to make that argument? And I suppose that you're prepared for that argument and you've written about it. And then, do you have strongly held views about aspect and action SART?
It's probably not right for me to call them strongly held views because the differences between Fanning and Porter in particular are more subtle than I understand. But my strongly held views are that we should probably stop talking about tense entirely. I think that's very unhelpful. And so I tend to side with Porter. I don't think there's any time, even in the indicative. I think that Wallace is just wrong. And so I think that I do think that after about 300 AD, that Greek changed. I've been looking at some Hellenist literature, and I think after 300 AD, the language changed, and it did start picking up the kind of what we call like the perfect being past completed action with ongoing results, and the present having an actual in the moment durative aspects. I think that's all post 300 AD. But yeah, for me, verbal aspect, my strongest opinion, which I get largely again from Porter mostly, although Fanning has some good stuff as well, and then McKay, who's a secular Hellenist on the perfect, is that it's, to use Charles's language, it's all camera angle. It's all camera angle. That's all aspect is. And that all of your, what we call action SARTs, that's really, we shouldn't be using that language. That's all a common, that's not in the aspect. That's all in the combination of the lexeme, the pragmatics, and the aspect. So
Okay.
I don't know if that helps, but that's the way that I look at it.
Oh, that's good. If you're on board with Porter and we're abolishing tense from the indicative.
Yep.
So like even the future indicative.
Yep. All of it.
Okay.
I don't think it's there.
And
so, I'm not so strong on it that you can't give me a counterexample, but though I just don't think that's the way the language works.
Yeah. Do you think that the language is aspect based?
Yes.
And I have a couple questions. Do you think like the perfect is imperfective?
I think that the perfect, so that's the super classical view. It goes back to, I would say that it's stative, which is to say imperfective, which people freak out when they hear perfect is imperfective, but you know what that means. So yeah, I think that it's primarily stative. So Wallace tries to keep the old view by having the intensive perfect be the dominant, but still being a past action with emphasis on ongoing results. And I just don't think that's what's in the perfect is doing. The perfect is just stative. It's showing, especially with some verbs, it depends on the verb because there's your lexeme, but the primary use of the perfect is, and I could be wrong, but my view of it is the primary use of the perfect is stative, therefore imperfective, and that it is rhetorical to draw attention.
That's interesting because it seems as though you want to say, are you saying that stative is in the aspect and not the action start? Because most people think that state is purely action start.
Yeah, I don't really like the action start bit anymore. I think that we should probably get away from action start. Action start is probably something, if we use that language, that's more of an exegetical categorization. I don't think that that's a linguistic. I don't think we should be doing action start in linguistics. I think that's something you do in exegesis, and that's at the post hoc classification to help you say this is what I think this is doing, given the lexeme and given the aspect and given the pragmatics. This is the action start that I'm assigning. I don't think any of that's in the actual language itself.
Okay, so you don't really like the different classification schemes like static, dynamic, durative, punctiliar. So
I think it's good for commentary and to help people explain what you think it's doing, but what it's doing, there is no such thing as an intensive perfect and an extensive perfect. There's just the perfect, and there's just the lexeme, and there's just the aspect, etc. And then what it's doing. There's just use. It's just what it's doing.
Oh man, I really like it. It helps me, and I like the things we get to, because I like the language that they like, accomplishment and achievement.
I use the language.
An achievement.
Yeah, and I'm not saying they don't use it. It's useful, but I don't think it's in the language. You can say it's from a categorization perspective. I'm calling this a durative, an iterative perfect. There's nothing wrong with an iterative present or a nomic present, because the word is used that way, and so we can tag them, and you can say, I'm interpreting this nomically, iteratively, and I'm just going to put a tag on it called a nomic present. But I don't think that tag is in the language. I think that tag is in the commentary to help us express what we think the text is doing.
Well, it seems like you're doing the same thing that the people who like action start are doing. You're saying, okay, we have the aspect, and we have the lexical, and then, or I guess the semantic, the lexical, and then the pragmatic, and then that's where we get how we're supposed to view the action.
At its best, I'm doing the same thing, but in my experience, which is not vast, but in 15 years of reading Greek commentaries, what people tend to do, and what people tend to do at the popular level is, well, these are my 7 choices, and they look at it as a menu, and therefore I'm going to choose this one. And I think that's the wrong way to do it.
Do you like Campbell? Because I was reading Campbell, and it seems as though he doesn't I guess respect the telic divide, and he says that it's all the camera zoom, and he even views the different aspects as like even more camera zoomed. Like so his main ideas is, okay, we have perfective, imperfective, and we have proximate and remote, and then he also has like extra proximate. Is that sort of where you?
I'm sympathetic to it. I haven't gotten enough into his to make all the fine distinctions, but what I have read of Campbell, I have found like, oh yeah, I think that works. So I can't sit here and tell you, oh, definitely, but what I have read of Campbell, for the same reasons. In fact, I read him before I read Porter. I'm like, oh yeah, that's what got me started this whole thing.
I got my last question, because I've been holding your feet to the fire maybe a bit, is what do you think of like the event nucleus type language that was, I guess it's not totally outdated. It was from like the 80s, and then it's sort of, there's some 2020 papers about it where you have like, you could say like the preparation, and then the culmination, and then the result. And then when we are using verbs, you essentially get the same action start categories, but instead of it being durative,
right,
state, like in those classical categories, they're really talking about, well, it's preparation and culmination, it's preparation and culmination and result. So they think it's like there's this state, and by state they don't mean stative, they just mean like a state of affairs.
Yep.
And then there's this like event, and then there's a change of state, and then you can view Do you think that's a useful template for?
So full
Action.
disclosure, I'm not familiar with that literature. I know that it exists. Now, what I will say, having said that I know that it exists, is I think that's a useful heuristic, but I don't, again, I'm going to go back to, I don't think that's the way the language works. Recognizing those guys who wrote those papers have looked at details that I haven't. I'm not inclined to think that's the way the language works. I think that that's probably better attributed to, just in my view, I think that's probably better attributed to lexeme. So let me give a real example. The verb kill. It's almost impossible. It is totally impossible, but it's almost impossible to make kill durative. So if I use that, it's punctiliar by nature, right? And so if I talked about he killed someone or he has killed someone before, that language, we hear he has killed. Oh, that's a perfect. That's a so-and-so. Or I have studied. And so we have all these ideas about relating that feels like you're talking about, oh, now the focus is on what happened as a result of. But I think all of that is more, it's really not in the aspect. I think all that is really in the lexeme first, and then it's in the pragmatics. And so I think that that's actually downstream. I think what they're doing with that language, they're taking downstream cumulative effects and reading them back into the language when it wasn't in the language in the first place. It wasn't in the morphology in the first place.
Well, that's why, they're using that language now, a procedural character, which is not much different than I skimmed those papers, Howdy. Not enough to follow the argument, but I was skimming it through and I was seeing the different things they're doing. And I'm seeing some similarities in what they're doing that the Greek verb revisited did. So I wouldn't be surprised, Howdy, as you continue to work through that book, if you don't come to the same conclusions as far as about how to evaluate or how to articulate these things.
Yeah, I still got some reading to do, but right now I sort of have a distaste for Campbell. It seems like everything is just the zoom in, zoom out. And I think surely there's more to language than that. I have one more question about as it relates to I guess New Testament literature specifically. Well, I should say the Gospels specifically and Acts. As a narrative, do you think that there are sort of rules for aspectual use? The present here is a historic, they say okay, well, aorist is the main line, and then you have offline, and then you have ways of adding from the sideline and stuff. Do you think the aspects have that sort of? Do you think that narratives sort of abide by that sort of default setting on use of aspects?
Sure. Hebrew for sure. Almost certainly. I think so for sure. Greek, I'm less sold on, but I tend to think probably just because one of the functions of the perfect, for instance, one of the functions of the perfect is to get under something like a main verb and to draw attention. But again, I'm probably, I guess one of the biggest, Howdy, what I would say to you, again, recognizing we're at the very limit of what I know, what I don't know. So I do not want to pretend I'm speaking out of turn, okay? But what I will say in general is I am far more impressed with pragmatics and discourse grammar as a field than I am with aspect theory. I really do think that aspect and tense has been overstated. I think it's really it's all camera. It's all how it's being presented. And I think the vast majority of what's happening in the text, including in narratives, is it's all in pragmatics. And so I think your Kais, your Des, your Mentes, your Mendes, those connections, I think that kind of stuff is more useful than I'm going to use this aspect for this line, but then switch this aspect for this offline.
Okay, so I guess my general, the feeling that I'm getting is you're really sort of deflationist. Is how is the term I would use, and for the language, the language isn't doing much. You would say the language isn't doing much work. It's the author doing most of the work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's probably I think that's actually probably well said.
Okay, thank you. That was very informative. Sorry for soaking up all the time.
Oh.
on that.
It's
So-
fine.
So Howdy, if you're not impressed with Con Campbell, and that's fine. I mean, as far as his theory, Con Campbell agrees that the time is not involved. So
No, he
That's-
thinks
that's-
the future. No, he thinks the future indicative is tensed.
yeah,
Unless
right.
I-
Anything that's in the indicative mood has time, but outside of the mood, there's consensus that it doesn't refer to time.
Yes, that's
But
the
Porter argues that there's not even time in indicative mood.
Yes, and that's what Chris is.
That's my view. It's
Yeah,
not my
so-
strong view, but I lean that way pretty. I assume that when I read.
Okay, so Howdy, right now, do you think that there's time outside of the indicative, or are you saying there's no time even in the indicative?
So I think I'm pretty. So I'm very new to this.
Yeah, don't worry.
In fact,
I think Howdy wants the language to do more than I do.
a little bit. So I'm very new. Like most of what I read about verbal aspects and action start was actually like in the last week. But I read quite a bit. I'm like a bibliophage. I have a lot of time. So my general thoughts, right, and these are like my initial thoughts, but maybe I'll change my mind upon revisiting and rereading the material over the next whatever, is that it's really hard not to have future indicative be tensed. To have all of the all of temporal, to have temporality in essentially in the speaker only and not in the languages.
Yeah,
There are some languages that do that, but not very many. The other, so I don't know. There's like I was reading through and like there's people making different arguments. It's like I'm not sure how much to stock to invest in. Like, well, languages don't do that. But so yeah, I think future indicative is tensed. Plausibly, other indicatives have.
but
Well, you could say
which
like
type of future indicative though? All future indicatives, or because you can use a future indicative for an imperatival future. You can use it as to give an expectation of something. And yeah, there's a predictive element, but it could be a near future. You could be other ideas. And so the question is, and I'm not there with Porter totally. I'll let you know that. Maybe it's true, but I don't know Porter as well as I know the other views. But the thing about it is that there may be other things that are making the future do that, rather than the future having that embedded in itself, or the indicative having it embedded in itself. Because if we go ahead.
For the record, I'm just saying what I think. I'm not saying I'm at all prepared to defend my initial appearances. Like Porter is obvious. The people there are very well educated people making arguments that it's not. And for me to just sit here and say, oh, they don't know what they're doing.
Same here, Howdy. Same here.
Right.
I'm with you.
Absolutely. But I'm bringing this up because as you're working with aspect, you're asking good questions, but you got to deal with the time issue, which you're kind of doing with. And then the other thing that you should deal with, I just thought about it. I forgot what it was. It was important too. Is language a portrayal of reality? And I know that's philosophical, but Wallace, who argues for time in the indicative, says that language is just a portrayal of reality. It's not reality itself. So I think that affects the argument too, because if you're saying that this present active participle is not a portrayal of reality, then okay, well, what is it then? It's a narrative world. It's part of the narrative world. It's part of the argument. And so if it's part of the argument, then we got to ask, well, how is it functioning? Well, if it's outside of time, outside of reality, it's outside of time. So the time that you would have to talk about is only in a relative sense. That's why a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, that's present tense from the standpoint of the time of speaking. Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, look, this is a statement about the narrative world at that time. I'm not saying it's right, but that's what goes on. And but then, like I've said before, the issue is even if we say it's not time, it's not reality, all of this, then we got to ask, well, what is the language doing? In other words, is this really coming down to speed check theory? Are these indicators here to motivate us to take an interpretation, but also to do something with that? And there's problems with speed check theory as well. So, I mean, but the thing is, Howdy, is we have not debated a single person that's anti-free grace that can have this conversation we're having right now. Not even close.
That's not true. I have that conversation with you all the time.
You can't even understand your own conversation.
Sure.
You did not.
Man, that
Professor.
I'm gonna let that go. And
Yeah,
on that note, oh my gosh, on that note, listen, y'all have a lovely night. I'm gonna be way too early, which is ridiculous. So I appreciate y'all, and I'll check on later on. All right. God bless y'all.
God bless.
I appreciate you for staying up so late and hanging out and all that.
Thanks, Howdy. I wouldn't have, but again, holiday, and this is the last one for a while, so I went and hang out with you. God bless y'all.
Going out with a bang. See ya.
So, I don't think there'll be many people live tomorrow, but what I may do is, because I don't have to work, is I may do a live reacting to his CJ Cox debate first. I want the reason being is I want to get through the CJ Cox stuff and reviewing it, and then that also gives me time to process the Steve Gregg stuff. But at the same time, I got to be prepared for my debate with Kevin, Biblical Discussions on Matthew 7, which is on the 18th. So what's that, 14 days from now? So I really probably need to wake up tomorrow, really hit that hard, and then if I got anything left in me after that, maybe I'll go live and start doing those, because I'm behind by 2 debates that Chris has done that we haven't really done a review of. So those are just my thoughts. But anything else, Howdy?
No, I'm good. It's just got a lot of reading to do, and yeah.
Well, I'm just glad that Con Campbell's Bible is fixing to come out, because it's going to force people to recognize, well, wait a minute, this isn't what this preacher's saying. Wait a minute, this isn't what this scholar, what I've been taught. It'll just be a way that it's kind of popularized to a certain extent. I mean, most people are not going to be able to understand that Greek study Bible, at least not with a little bit of help. But my guess is that once that book is out, there'll be a more layman type book that's brought out. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens, because as far as I know, Con Campbell's not free grace. I have a friend that was writing a paper. Huh?
Do you know when it's coming out?
October. I was told that because I potentially may be doing a review. And this is iffy, but I have talked to someone about it. I'll just put it that way. So I may potentially be doing a written journal critique review of it. But that I may not be up to it. I may not. But I'm willing to try. Well, guys, Janet's calling me, so I'm gonna go ahead and land the plane. Yeah. Y'all check out more content, old stuff, new stuff. It's all good. God bless.
All right. Have a good night.